Jade and today I'm going to talk about Harm OCD, why it feels so real, my experience with it, and some of the things that lead us to feel really isolated. This is going to be a little bit of a you're not alone type video to hopefully make you feel like it's not just you who's experiencing all these difficulties and these feelings, and we'll also touch a little bit on the types of things that you can do if you feel like you've tried everything and you're just not getting better. So I'll give some top tips on maybe some of the reasons why that might be. So I think Harm OCD is one of the ones that you put into the category of like the taboo OCD themes. And when it's really gripped on you, it is impossible to see how anyone could think that this theme is not the absolute most difficult, worst one in the whole world. And I have had this debate with people in the past, right when I was in the midst of harm themed themes, and just being like, I don't see how you could possibly think that this is not the hardest theme. And I think we can all agree that even though no one theme is technically harder than any other, because when we get that all too common, very frightening, massive grip, you know, when you get triggered and you just feel like the blood rush from your body and your face, and you feel like, for me, it would feel like I've got to get out. I need to get out. And if I was eating, I'd have to immediately stop eating. And I probably would often go outside into the freezing cold air. That would be the only thing that could lead to me feeling that there's any form of escape. When you feel that coming in, that's the same. No matter what you're scared of in OCD, that walls closing in, utter terror feeling is the same. And I did used to think, because I've suffered with ROCD as well, to a lesser extent, I used to think, how could you possibly be scared about being in the wrong relationship versus the idea that you might be able to harm somebody and end up completely socially rejected in prison or whatever it is, or make peace that you have a brain that is, you know, you're a psychopath or any number of things. How could you possibly see that as more scary? And it took me ages to like break that down. But I think one of the answers is that when you have these types of themes, there's such a large element of societal rejection involved that can lead you to feel extremely isolated. So, for example, when I would obsess about ROCD, it was very easy for me to gain reassurance from colleagues at work or friends and be like, hey, so I've been having some doubts about my boyfriend. You know, have you ever had this? They'd be like, oh, it's normal, you know, just go out for a nice meal and see how you feel. And obviously it wasn't helping my OCD at all, but there wasn't shame attached to having that conversation. The same with many other themes. You know, I've got friends who have got severe anxiety, and everyone in the family knows what it is that triggers them and what upsets them. So it can be easier for them to talk about it. Now, I'm certainly not suggesting that any form of OCD suffering is worse than any other. I'm just talking about the very specific feelings within harm OCD, POCD, any taboo related topics in OCD that you just feel so isolated. And I think it's why there's such a big barrier to getting help. So I lived with OCD for, well, severe harm POCD from age about 14 up until 25 without having any seeking of treatment whatsoever, because I just wholly believed what was going on in my brain, and because it was so taboo, I never spoke to anyone. And so that then led to extreme isolation. Whereas when I had other themes, I could talk about them or felt able to talk about them, and then was encouraged, you know, down the paths of like, oh, well, sounds like you're obsessing about this a lot. Maybe you should speak to a therapist or something. And so I think that that's why it's so important for, I guess, awareness to be spread around these themes so that people don't feel so alone. Because ultimately, when you have OCD, you have a brain that has, and I don't want to go too far into like the science of it, but I guess you could call it a faulty amygdala gland. Like at the front, your threat response is just jacked up and it kind of latches to what we're scared of. And I think for this channel, it's all about simplifying what OCD really is. It's simply that we are afraid of things, and OCD likes to obsess about those things to try and make sure that things don't happen. And that's where the compulsions come in. So for me, a common fear I talked about in the past was like I'd get really worried about eating raw chicken. And so my compulsions were to dramatically overcook chicken to the point of no return. It was inedible because I was so terrified of getting sick. once I could learn to not fear being sick, a lot of my fears went. And for example, even today, if ever I feel any form of OCD trigger trying to get in, I always am aware that the first feeling I would get is nausea and like the inability to want to eat, because I'd be panicked. What if I'm sick from feeling triggered? But now that I'm not actually afraid of being sick, it doesn't latch. So even if that tries to come in, it's like, oh, right, well, I would be sick. And I don't use it as a reassurance. I don't even say it to myself. It's just that I'm not afraid of being unwell anymore. I'm at peace that being unwell means X, Y, or Z, and it's not great. I definitely don't want it, but it's not as bad as I think. And so when you can learn to see that the goal of OCD recovery is to view feared scenarios in the same way that someone without OCD views them, i.e., it's a strange thought, I wouldn't want that to happen, but I'm not going to obsess over it, I'm not going to give it any of my thought. That is what OCD recovery will look like. And I know 100% that it works, because when I applied not only the standard treatment options that you have with OCD, because we're not suggesting that they're not great, because exposure therapy is, for me, it was like a huge component of OCD recovery. We need that. We need to face the fears, because the more that we move away from them, the more we avoid them. And we also need the element of just learning to not be scared of the fear as well. Because in my experience, the advice that exists on the internet around harm OCD generally is go with uncertainty, which is you can never know if this is true or not. Exposures, face the fears, and also recognize that thoughts are just thoughts, and probably you're having them because your moral compass is too strong. And that's why you're having them, because you're such a good person that you're appalled by these thoughts. And so it's the opposite of you. And the problem with this, it's very good in the early education phases of OCD recovery. So for example, we need to know that. We're not disputing that. That's absolutely 100% true. So when I started to get better from OCD, the first step was, oh my goodness, this therapist said, have you heard of Harm OCD? And I was like, I don't have OCD. I've just got this crazy brain with all these upsetting thoughts. I'm not a clean freak. That was my first thought. And then she told me to research it. And then we started a program of exposure therapy, of like highlighting what I was scared of and doing it more often. And then it was very much about like, let's look at your morals. You clearly got strong morals as a person, and these are opposed to your morals. And beyond just learning how OCD operates, that can become extremely compulsive, because if you're reminding yourself, oh, the reason that this intrusive thought is upsetting me is because I'm a very good person, I would never do that. Unfortunately, while it gives temporary relief, it's not actually going to help long term, because your brain will always find a way around that. And so that's why for me, that wore off. It worked for about 6 months. Similarly with uncertainty, was like, you can learn to live with uncertainty. And this for me is like the biggest loophole in harm OCD recovery. This idea that, I'm talking in severe cases of harm OCD, I'm not talking about like minor to mid-level OCD, I'm talking about like very severe, like what I had, where you're so unbelievably latched to your fears and the possibility of them being true, and you've convinced yourself absolutely that you are a dangerous person or that you are capable of harming someone. There was no amount of exposures I could do, and no amount of uncertainty of leaving it there, that would lead to the fears just kind of slowly evaporating. And I have seen that language used in articles suggesting how exposure recovery works. And I've no doubt that for many, like thousands, probably millions of people, that has definitely worked. Like for me, with my lower level fears, like ROCD, just like exposures and accepting uncertainty has done wonders, and it's almost completely unlatched from that. The same with my chicken fears. It was like, expose yourself. Well, actually, no, it didn't work on the chicken fears, because the basic example is that I was still scared of getting sick. I was scared of what it would mean if my fear came true. And so until I could turn down the fear on that scenario, still definitely not wanting to get sick, still making sure that I'm cooking hygienically without being compulsive, but having the same response that someone without OCD would have by turning down my fear and not fearing the outcome as much. And so this is where I think, from my experience, just from my own experience, I reckon this is probably why so many people are still stuck with these themes and so hopeless. But I've tried all of that and I'm still so unwell. And I think that is where that missing piece of unconditional self and life acceptance and rational thinking is missing. That was, for me, the missing piece in the overall puzzle of getting better from OCD, because everything that's recommended is so valuable and so needed. And this one last piece just really helped everything click into place. And it really gave me answers I'd been waiting for. Like when I'd say, I'm still terrified of it. What if it happens? What if it happens? Just go with uncertainty. You can never know. Okay, so I'm going to be obsessing about this for the rest of my life then. If I can never know, I'm never going to be able to make peace with whether it will or won't. But what happens is when you don't, not mind, but when you don't really feel that scared as a person who's OCD is about the feared outcomes, it just turns it down and there's nothing to latch to. And so this is not like anything radical we're suggesting. It's not like, oh, you've got to make peace with your feared scenario and be comfortable with it happening. Same way as if I asked my husband, who doesn't have any mental health condition, hey, how do you feel about the idea of having killed someone and spending 15 years in prison? He would say, are you kidding? I would definitely not want that, and I'm going to avoid that at all costs. But he's not going around in life obsessing about it and worrying about it. He just has that rational response. And that's exactly where the term around the rational emotive behavior therapy from Albert Ellis in the books on the reading list for this channel comes in, is this idea of being able to turn down the fear of the outcome so that we have the same response as someone without OCD. Again, not agreeing that it's okay and that we want it, but making peace that even in the worst scenarios we can possibly imagine, we would be able to survive. People have before. We definitely wouldn't want it, but it's not something that's worth us spending our entire being and obsessing over. And so I guess today I just wanted to reach out to you to let you know that if you're feeling isolated and you're feeling really scared about your thoughts, like, make sure that you are speaking to somebody, a life coach, a professional, a therapist, somebody who is going to have a really deep, thorough understanding of Harm OCD. Make sure that you vet who you're going to be working with so that you know they definitely specialize in OCD, and even question them, like, what methods do you use, and make sure that you know that it's going to be to a really high standard and that everything makes sense to you. Because something I found really difficult in my journey was like dealing with different people, different therapists, some of whom were not specialists in OCD and some of whom I knew more about OCD than they did, and it became really challenging. So you need to make sure that the person that you're going to work with is able to really clearly explain the path to recovery that makes sense to you. And so ask plenty of questions. Now, there's a particular type of feeling that comes up when Harm OCD is really latched to us. I remember sitting with people and just thinking, how can you all be so happy and at peace? Like, how can you just lay there on a beach towel, just relaxed and not be like in the frantic state that I am in my brain? I'd every now and then, like every other minute, get like this overwhelming sense of dread of like, oh my gosh, if they knew what had been going through my brain, they would never speak to me again. They would know what a monster I am, how awful I am, how terrible I am. And then there was all of the urge things like, oh my gosh, you're just going to do it. So then I'd just be clenched all the time. And so I think recovery is really about being able to do exposures and being able to relax our systems, our bodily systems, so that we do feel like we're kind of on that cliff edge. Like, it should feel a little bit scary and dangerous when you're in your exposures, because if you're kind of gritting your teeth and white knuckling your way through it, it's probably not going to be doing what you need it to be doing. And so really, my biggest piece of advice when it comes to exposures is to make sure that you really are doing exposures and that you're not just kind of getting through them to the side. Like, be there, be present, let the uncomfortable feelings come in. And you are, as much as I know that I needed all of the unconditional self and life acceptance stuff, like, exposures, they do a huge amount. Like there's scenarios I would have been petrified to go into that only from exposures I was able to enjoy after a while, because the more you go, you are technically training your brain that there is no danger where you feel terrified. And so the more that you do things, it actually forces you to obsess less, because you're just doing it, you're just getting on with it. And so I recommend with exposures as well not to like ruminate before them or overthink it. Just be like, right, I am going to chop the vegetables with the sharp knife in very close proximity to my whole family 4 nights a week this week, or whatever it is. I'm going to bath my children every night for a week, and I'm not even going to think about it. I'm just going to do it. And obviously it's about building up to things. Like I can't tell you how locked on my OCD was. I would be like avoiding things like the plague for so long. And if I knew I had to do something that was going to trigger me, I would be just desperate in pieces for like 3 days in the lead up. And it was only until I threw myself in the deep end and truly committed to absolutely going for it without looking back, with like such intensity, like keep going, like dragging myself up every day to do it again, do it again, do it again. And like that intensive exposure period, it should feel pretty uncomfortable. Like if you're just doing things here and there and then kind of coming back, it's going to be a difficult period in your life. But it's that saying, isn't it? The only way out is through. Like I love that saying. There's no other way. The only way out is through. And like I always say, that Erica said to me, you've got to jump into the fire. It needs to feel like that, which for me was a very empowering feeling. I spent a lot of time angry when I learned that everything I'd been doing with OCD recovery had only got me so far. Like when I'd been doing exposures and uncertainty and thoughts of thoughts and mindfulness and yoga and everything, I was like 70% better, genuinely a lot better. But it was still kind of the driver of my life. It would still be, I'd have to think about things. I'd have to be like, oh, I don't want to go there, but I will. It was like, I knew it was OCD, so I wasn't particularly worried that I was an awful person anymore, but I'd have these niggling doubts, and then I would still want to avoid things even though I wouldn't. And I just wasn't great. I was just okay. I wasn't in 10 panic attacks a day mode, but I wasn't comfortable or happy. I was still scared most of the time. And I think a lot of us make peace that that's just the way it is. That's how you're going to feel. And that's not the case. So it was when I went further and really went for it, that's when I started to see things shifting and just unlocking. And I think if yours is locked on as tight as mine was, it does take quite a grit to just like really get going. Like if you think about it, like if you have like a jam jar that you can't open. So like if my husband's done up the jam jar, I can't open it because it's too locked on, because he's just used a different level of strength than I would. And so if I'm just weakly trying, it's never going to happen. Whereas if I use great force for a longer period of time, and maybe my arm's going to be really hurting, or my hand's going to seize up a little bit, like if I keep trying, I probably will be able to. But it's almost like it feels out of reach, because my belief is, oh, well, my husband did that, so I'm not strong enough for that, so it's not going to happen. But if I just keep finding ways, use a tea towel, all different things, and keep going, be determined, I probably am going to be able to get at least a little bit of looser and eventually be able to open the jar. Hopefully it doesn't take as long to open the jar as it does to recover from OCD. But it's that type of thing. It's like, oh, I can't do it. Like I probably give up too easily in real life and just say, oh, open it for me. But that's kind of how our OCD is. It's like slowly just releasing it a little bit, which takes intensity. So I hope that's been useful. If you're feeling alone, if you're feeling isolated, please don't. There are millions of people in the world who are in exactly the same position as you. It can feel really unfortunate when our OCD latches to these areas. Once it unlatches, the joy that's available in doing the things that you thought you could never do again is just staggering. It has been for me. It's been like mind-blowing. The joy that's come from just such simple things that other people would take for granted has almost been worth it at times, the deep suffering. And also the perspective gaining that I've had from going through everything I've been through with OCD, which has been like an invisible war that went on most of my life is something I feel very proud of today. And I think if you can find grit, determination, and pride in how strong you are for even having existed with Harm OCD for as long or as little as you have, if you can harness that and use it to move forward and recognize that it's not weak how you're feeling, you're not a weak person, you are going through an extreme amount and you're coping in the way that you have to cope in order to get through that. And so because it's invisible, people don't always recognize why that battle would be so big. But cut yourself some slack. If someone had a severe physical illness and had to be in bed for a couple of weeks or had to withdraw from certain things, then we would understand immediately. But because it's invisible, it's harder for people to grasp. That said, don't let it take you down. Like, fight for everything with everything that you've got to just do as much as you can to get better. And if you have any questions for me at all, please comment below. Please like the video, and also don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you can watch some more. Have a good day. Bye.